The tape recordings you are about to hear were recorded in undisclosed locations more than 20 years ago. They were made on an old microcassette recorder and have never been played publicly before. Some of the things that are said may be both difficult to understand due to the quality of the tapes and troubling to hear due to content. Listener discretion is advised.
Roscommon is a county and town in the center of Ireland, nestled in those green rolling hills that many call heaven. But Roscommon is known for something else, home to a place known as the Gates of Hell. The entrance to an ancient cave known as Owainagat, or Cave of the Cats, is a place said to be a portal to another world. Early Christians believed the gate opened on Halloween every year, allowing dead souls to enter the world of the living. Some also believed the cave was home to a triple-headed monster. Ireland's early history can be a little dark, but it was on a trip to Roscommon with his new IRA associates in the 1990s that Dave Rupert was learning more about the darkness cast over the modern-day Ireland. FBI agent Ed Buckley, if you recall from the last episode, had visited Dave at his Chicago area truck stop. Knowing he'd been palling around with IRA types while vacationing, Buckley asked Dave to pass along any information he came up with about them. In exchange, Dave's future trips to Ireland would be financed by the U.S. government. Dave hadn't committed to Buckley's ask. He was mulling it over. But he was back in Ireland nonetheless, visiting his friends, some of the same guys who'd drawn Buckley's attention to him in the first place.
Joe O'Neill and I went to the office in Dublin. We're on our way back, and he says, "Listen, I got to go to a meeting in Roscommon, And he says, "I can't take you there, but he says, I'm going to take you to this hotel, and I'll leave you there and wait for you."
They were conducting some sensitive rebel business, so they dropped Dave at a Roscommon hotel to wait out of earshot. Dave wasn't in their inner circle. They liked him, they trusted him, but not enough that he'd be in on things. At least not yet. And that's when Dave finds something that gives him a jolt of panic while noodling through his wallet. Buckley's FBI business card. Dave had held on to it.
I had this shit in my wallet, and I didn't know it was coming down. I was like brand new to this, and at the time, as we got on through the thing, I realized that these guys were bad guys, but, maybe not as bad, you know what I mean? It was more talk than do.
Yeah. It's not likely someone is going to search his wallet, but Dave's not taking any chances.
So I didn't know what to do with it, right? You know what the 3 flush theory is? That anytime you put something down in the toilet, you need to flush it 3 times so it gets out of the trap. Yeah. And I was worried about putting it in the toilet because it wouldn't go down, so I ate the fuck. Sorry.
That's right. Worried that he couldn't flush Buckley's card down the toilet, Dave did the most sensible thing he could think of. He chewed it up and swallowed it.
That was early on.
Yeah, that's right. But what else you gonna do with it? Yeah.
Left alone in the room, weren't you?
I was at the hotel. Yeah, but I mean, if you burn something, then what do you burn? Yeah, so eat it. So I'm in there, patching, trying to sling up the little pieces, but maybe that's what's the matter with my stomach.
At the Buckley card.
Yeah, at Buckley's card.
Indigestion. Buckley had caused a lot of that during his years as an FBI agent in Chicago. He was assigned to investigate any IRA-related activities in America, which was helping fuel the war raging in Ireland by supplying guns and money.
I'm Abden Palish.
I'm Bob Hergeth.
In partnership with Entropy Media.
This is Underbelly, the rebel kind.
The IRA getting a lot of money from America. Can you do something about it?
Back in the days when landlines had the phone was, I was assuming the phone was tapped.
One thing that David Rupert is very, very good at is just sitting there and listening without asking too many questions.
Would talk about it and sing about it and get everybody cranked up. That, let's stay just far enough away where you don't get arrested.
It's November 1991, and FBI agent Ed Buckley is sitting in a surveillance vehicle outside of a bar in Chicago called the Irish Wolfhound.
Didn't have a wooden floor, it had a dirt floor if I recall.
This is Bill Murphy, a defense attorney from Chicago who, along with his co-counsel Peter McCabe, defended clients in an IRA-related case Ed Buckley investigated back then.
Buckley, of course, is looking for anything. He finds this guy, John Tuttle, This guy, Tuttle, was a bad guy who I still don't know how he found him or what his relevance was. He was the informant and he wires him up.
Ed Buckley was using John Tuttle as an undercover informant. That night, Tuttle walked into the Irish Wolfhound to secretly record a meeting of an Irish-American fundraising group.
This was a meeting of an organization called the Friends of Irish Freedom. I guess they were supposed to advance the cause of getting the British out of Northern Ireland, or at least unifying Ireland. Didn't have anything to do with weapons or illegal overthrow of the government or terrorism.
But apparently that's not what the FBI thought. According to federal court records, Ed Buckley sent John Tuttle into the group in an effort to find evidence that the Friends of Irish Freedom were involved with IRA gun running.
He had what they call a Nagra, which at the time was a very costly body recording device. I think it was a couple grand. So he's got Tuttle there, and I don't even know why Tuttle got in the meeting in any event.
Tuttle was there because he had told Buckley that the Friends of Irish Freedom had asked him for help procuring weapons. Credible or not, Ed Buckley used that to justify the sting operation that night at the Wolfhound.
At some point, Tuttle must have been itching or playing with something, and because he's getting nervous now, and someone said, "Hey, what's going on?" And so they, rip open his shirt and they see this very expensive recording device.
According to an affidavit written by Buckley, 2 hours into the meeting, the group turns on Tuttle and cuts the Nagra out of his jacket, while allegedly threatening to cut his throat.
Buckley then, he must be outside of the bar by a block. So they come charging in. And meanwhile, somebody has taken the recording device and taken it out the back door or whatever. And somehow it got lost. And so now Buckley has a situation where he's clearly trolling for anything. And now he's got to explain why he had 3 or 4 agents sitting in a truck a half a block down the street, and why he lost a $2,000 Nagra.
The sting operation comes to an abrupt end when FBI agents burst into the bar to rescue their mole. The agents find Tuttle hiding in the bathroom after he escaped from the fray. But what they can't find is the expensive audio recorder they had planted in his jacket. It was a bad night for everyone, including Buckley, but if you think this was a disaster, it gets worse, because members of the Friends of Irish Freedom will be charged in connection with the botched sting operation.
Everybody is screaming, where's the recording device?
Dave was far from Buckley's first shot at infiltrating Irish-American activists in Chicago.
Buckley was a chief FBI agent who was working here in Chicago with the remit of disrupting as much as possible the support network for the provisional IRA originally, but in the late 1980s into the 90s.
This is Professor Andy Wilson, a longtime source of history and context for the stories I've written on Ireland and Northern Ireland.
I'm Andy Wilson, originally from Dungannon in County Tyrone, Northern Ireland. I've been in Chicago since 1985, a long time, and I teach Irish American history at Loyola University Chicago. I've been doing that for quite a while.
Andy Wilson says by 1994, when Buckley arrives at Dave's office, he has some baggage.
For someone who, I guess, made a number of high-profile errors in his actions in the late 1980s and 1990s. When I say errors, I would mention Chris Fogarty and Frank O'Neill seemed to be a real farce of a case.
When Andy says high-profile errors, he's starting off with the investigation that night in 1991 at the Irish Wolfhound, which became a federal court case against popular Chicago pub owner Frank O'Neill, no relation to Joe O'Neill back in Ireland, and local Irish activist Chris Fogarty, among others. Back to Frank O'Neill's defense attorneys on the case, Peter McCabe and Bill Murphy.
My name is Peter McCabe. I was at Winston-Strawn at the time that this case was going on. And Bill Murphy, I knew Bill from a case. We had a Chinese gambling case, which ended the year before. So we figured we had to now do our part for the Irish.
Bill Murphy is now 80 years old and still a practicing attorney. When we asked him if he remembered this case, he said, of course. How could he forget?
Frank O'Neill was a very popular person in the city of Chicago. I mean, everybody loved Frank. You know, everybody had been drinking in his bar since they were in Fenwick. But Frank never really disliked the English. He kept on saying they're wonderful people. He just didn't like their government. So Frank got indicted, and I was representing Frank.
Frank O'Neill was well connected in Chicago, owning a bar not far from Fenwick High School. But his IRA history dating back decades put him on the FBI's radar as someone whose support might have included trafficking weapons.
They were kind of on Frank way before this incident. Frank had a bar that was right at the corner of Oak Park and Chicago, and it was next to an Irish funeral parlor. And they were always watching the funeral parlor when somebody passed away, and they sent the body back to the old country and saying that the caskets were very heavy.
Bill laughs as he recounts rumors that the funeral home was loading caskets up with weapons to send back to Ireland. We haven't been able to find any evidence of caskets loaded with weaponry, but there was one incident we heard about. It turns out a tractor axle en route from Chicago to Ireland fell off a crane on an Irish dock, and when it broke open, a .50 caliber rifle fell out. The axle had been shipped from Oak Park, in fact, just blocks from Frank O'Neill's bar. He was said to be a key suspect, but never charged. This type of incident is what landed Chicago, among other American cities, in the FBI's crosshairs. One of the long-standing targets of U.S. investigations was Frank O'Neill, right here in Chicago. He will eventually end up playing a key role in Dave's story because of his little fundraising group, the Friends of Irish Freedom. This is the group Ed Buckley had sent John Tuttle to infiltrate at the Irish Wolfhound, the operation that ended with a missing audio recorder and criminal charges.
So now Buckley has a situation where he's clearly trolling for anything. And now he's got to explain why he had 3 or 4 agents sitting in a electronic truck a half a block down the street, and why he lost a $2,000 Nagra. That's kind of hard to hide in the expense report.
If I recall, and I know I'm right, that he had to pay for it so that somehow the Nagra was packaged and put in a mailbox, and he was told where the Nagra would be if he looked in this mailbox. That I remember, because that everybody was screaming, where's the recording device? And it appeared magically.
What was this? One of the Friends of Irish Freedom gave it back to him? Or we don't know, huh?
I know.
Well, one of the charges in the indictment was the theft of, government property, which is a felony if it's above a certain level. And the cost of the Nagra was a certain level. So truth be told, I think that's why the case was brought, because Buckley lost his Nagra.
Luckily, the costly device found its way back to Buckley.
So the case had a few twists and turns, and so it became clear that Tuttle wasn't going to testify at trial.
Tuttle was the key witness in the case. It was his word that the Friends of Irish Freedom had asked him for help procuring weapons that launched this whole operation, but suddenly he's nowhere to be found. So Peter went to Boston looking for him. He didn't find him, but he soon got a phone call from Tuttle's father.
I think the way the phone call started was, "Why are you looking for my son?" I have no idea how he got our number or how he made contact or why he decided, but it was pretty unusual for the father of the star witness to call the lawyers working on opposite side of the case. I mean, it was not a short call. The gist of it was that my son's a liar and he'll tell anything anybody wants to hear. don't believe it.
With the lead witness out of the picture, Peter returned to the tape recording of the meeting that night.
Fogarty would say, okay, let the record show that the time right now is 7 o'clock. The fact that they did that worked to our advantage. And here's why, because at some point when they said it was 7 and then it was 7:30, there was only about 15 or 20 minutes of tape, and I had it timed. And I thought, wow, there's at least 10 minutes of tape missing. And then we determined that there were probably another 10 minutes somewhere during the meeting. So there was a good 20 minutes of that tape missing. So I believe Bill calls up the prosecutor and says, hey, did you give us all this tape? And the prosecutor says, yes. He said, well, we're missing stuff. And the prosecutor then said, well, I'll talk to the agent about that.
According to Peter McCabe, there was a section of the tape missing. He says the federal government somehow tampered with the tapes, and it falls on the lead agent in this case, Ed Buckley.
I was essentially accusing the government, and more specifically Buckley, since he was the agent in charge of this matter, of they had not given us, or in essence, tampered with the evidence.
Bill Murphy and Peter McCabe sent the tapes to a retired FBI agent in Madison, Wisconsin, who said he believed the tape had been altered. The U.S. Attorney's Office then sent the tape to their own expert in Washington. A week later, the U.S. Attorney's Office decided to drop the case. We may never know if it was the tape or other questions the U.S. or British governments didn't want to answer about this botched sting operation. The U.S. government has never said why it suddenly dropped the charges.
But I still remember we're walking out and we're on the street, and Frank looked at me and said, is that all there is? And I said, that's it, Frank. I think he wanted the trial. Maybe they'd write a song about him.
I think like any good Irishman, he wanted to see a fight. And it was sort of a letdown. I'll tell you, I remember the crowd, and it was a crowd, supporting Frank and the rest of the defendants. And they were very disappointed that this wasn't going to go forward.
We asked them what they thought happened to the government's case.
They created something that just wasn't there. And again, I think it was the particular FBI agent who for years after that lost face. I didn't think he was particularly sharp on this case. He was the one who kind of bullied the Irish in Chicago.
We got a hold of Buckley recently, and he tells us he didn't monkey with the Niagara recordings and wouldn't have had the technological ability to do so. He says he stands by his actions in the case. We've also heard about complaints from FBI agents that Niagaras could be unreliable and temperamental. They say it wasn't uncommon for gaps in tape to emerge because of the imperfections of the equipment.
In my days as a naive lawyer who thought that, everybody played by the rules, this guy was not playing by the rules, and I thought it needed to be called out. Anybody who's implicated in altering a tape, which that tape was altered, I can't believe he didn't know about it, and he was the lead agent. And he should have, at the very least, been reprimanded, if not fired.
But that didn't happen. And Buckley's work was far from over.
My mom's father was shot by the Black and Tans at their doorstep because they had 2 IRA guys on the run in it. And then the whole family, they were put them on trial then for shilling and that. And the summation at the end of the trial was they're a nest of rebels.
This is Colin Fagan. His grandfather was shot by the Black and Tans, British soldiers used to police Ireland back in the 1920s during the Irish War of Independence.
My name is Colin Fagan. I was born in Ireland in Summerhill County, Meath. I've been living in the United States since 1956, and most of that time in Chicago. I was involved with the Republican movement from basically as long as I can remember as a child.
Colin Fagan's story might sound familiar because it happened to a lot of Irish families. Colin's family was part of a wave of post-World War II immigration by Irish Catholics to find a new home in America. But their allegiance and support for the Irish Republican cause back home got them special attention here in the United States.
My children will tell you about my daughter in her pram taking pictures of the feds sitting in the car at the corner. Back in the days when landlines had that, the phone was always assumed the phone was tapped.
Fagan was part of an organization we've mentioned before called Irish Northern Aid, NORAID for short. The group would set up fundraisers here in the U.S. They said that money would be sent to the families of the Irish Republican prisoners being held by the British, though the U.S., British, and Irish governments long alleged it was used to pay for weapons.
Whenever we would set up information tables and sell T-shirts and books and stuff and give away a whole lot of information at all the events.
And one of the people who'd show up was FBI agent Ed Buckley.
And the biggest ones for us were the ones when they used to do the Irish Fest, and they used to do it down on Navy Pier. And yeah, and he was sitting there for the whole day at a picnic table straight across the thing, and everyone that came up is there taking pictures and them taking to anyone that took literature. Interesting. I had no direct contact with them, and thankfully, but it's just you always assumed that whatever you were doing, people were watching. And
Fagan says he was used to surveillance, and Buckley would regularly monitor local Irish events.
You have to wonder what his job was, and I think he had to go out of his way to find things to justify it, because even people that were here interested in raising money for the Army or interested in raising money for that did not go through us. We'd be the last people they'd go through.
Ed Buckley was leading the Chicago FBI's effort to uncover connections between the IRA and its support network in America. Irish Americans say Buckley unfairly hounded the community, keeping constant tabs on their lawful events and fundraising activities. Right around the time of Buckley's investigation at the Wolfhound, another investigation raised serious questions about his methods and sparked pure outrage. In 1990, a young couple named Nancy and Richard Langert are murdered in their home on Chicago's North Shore. Defense attorney Peter McCabe remembers the story.
I lived about 6 blocks from where that murder occurred. And I do remember there being some wild rumor about, the IRA was somehow connected to these murders, but they were just sort of regular folks. I mean, it was a terrible tragedy. And the fact that the IRA got mentioned, that was a head scratcher to me.
Professor Andy Wilson also remembers this case.
I mean, the allegation that they were investigating was that because Jean Bishop had been doing legal work for Republicans in Northern Ireland, that somehow this was linked to Northern Ireland.
Nancy Langert's sister, Jean Bishop, is a well-respected Chicago attorney who has done humanitarian work for Republican prisoners.
And there was an allegation that when her sister, when she was close to death, scrawled IRA on the wall. Now, that turned out to be false. It was actually, I believe, I Heart You for her husband. But the allegation then was that Buckley used that alleged connection to do a significant investigation of the Irish American support network here.
The story that hit the newsstands in 1990 claimed the FBI believed Nancy Langert had been targeted in relation to her sister's supposed IRA connections. Defense attorney Bill Murphy also remembers this story and knows Nancy Langert's sister Jean.
And Jeannie, she lashed out against him. And I still see her. She's just a good lawyer and a good person. The fact that he tried to implicate them was ridiculous. That should have got him fired.
As it turned out, a neighborhood high schooler who wanted to be a hitman had simply chosen Richard and Nancy as his first victims. The cold-hearted act eventually revealed itself when the real killer bragged to a classmate about it. When the friend went to the cops, it showed the IRA connection to be complete bunk, something critics say the media should have realized and reported sooner, rather than contributing to the false narrative. A few fine points. the IRA doesn't do violence in America. That'd be political suicide given the importance of U.S. support to their cause. What's more, Gene and Nancy really don't look alike, so a case of mistaken identity was unlikely. And had the IRA actually committed the murders, they would have owned up. In their world, they take credit for their acts, even brazen errors. Whether the FBI believed there was really an IRA connection to the murder or not, Buckley had used the opportunity to drag Irish Republicans and their supporters into the investigation. Critics pointed out Buckley's sideshow drained resources that could have gone toward finding the real killer.
I don't know who was responsible for that, but talk about capitalizing on somebody else's grief to make a law enforcement point is beyond terrible.
Buckley needed a win. He did not come out of these investigations smelling like a rose.
There's a lot worse stuff that is going on at the FBI that doesn't get punished. But at the time, heads should have rolled. And, Buckley should have probably been transferred to the Anchorage office. He should have been fired, obviously. And, maybe the case of Irish terrorism was so high that they were willing to take a few hits.
Buckley denies he did anything wrong in that case and said he was not trying to recruit Gene Bishop as a confidential informant. When we spoke to Buckley, he told us of his involvement in the murder investigation. Quote, "It was not a subterfuge to look into the pro-IRA community in Chicago." In the case where Bill and Peter defended Frank O'Neill, court transcripts show Buckley described himself as an international terrorism investigator.
My theory is that at a higher level, there was a lot of terrorism going on, and Britain, of course, was the main target. I have no way of proving this, but my guess is that whoever the prime minister was at the time, somebody put it in either Reagan or Bush 41's ear that, hey, how about a little help? The IRA is getting a lot of money from America. Can you do something about it? My guess is that the FBI and Buckley and other agents were tasked with figuring out what the problem was and what was going on. And they were told to stop it.
Peter may be onto something here. An expert we talked to told us Irish terrorism wasn't something the U.S. intelligence services really seemed to care about as much as our allies in Britain. But the U.S. really cared about intelligence on Islamic terrorism and the Middle East, which Britain had a handle on. So there was essentially a trade-off. They provided us with intel on the Middle East, and we helped them with the Irish.
Put it this way, for Chicago, he was definitely the guy.
He was always trying to drum up something.
The FBI was trying to target any illicit support for the Irish Republican cause that might be of interest to British intelligence.
So if you're talking about a sort of psychological motivation here, I think you got someone that's been smarting from some of these failures, and it might have given him a stronger drive to make sure that he did something significant. And when he encountered Rupert, he must have seen the potential in this.
As you might have guessed by now, Dave Rupert eventually accepted Ed Buckley's proposal.
It didn't seem like a bad arrangement to me. I wasn't best of friends with either Joe or, it was morally acceptable. With the IRA, if it was a legitimate struggle and suppose they only hit military targets, that would have been probably, to me, a horse of a different color, so to speak, a different kettle of fish.
His mission was to keep his eyes and ears open and let the FBI know what the IRA might be up to.
I probably don't disagree with the Republican philosophy that the Blitz probably shouldn't be there. Although I don't know if there's any real easy way out, short of maybe what Trimble's recommending now is that we have a referendum.
So Dave began making regular trips to Ireland on the FBI's dime to hang out with his friend, Joe O'Neill.
Joe was easier to get close to than Vinci Murray was. He thought
You thought you had a lot of money.
He thought I had a lot of money.
Financially.
I could have, and he would get like, well, I need some phones. I'd bring him over some phones, like phone system. No, that's okay. I need a fax machine. I need a computer, or could help him out here.
To the pub, you would get $100 here and
Yeah,
the
drop
car.
them, some money in.
Joe thinks Dave is a wealthy American looking to splash some cash for the cause. Joe's not only a local councilman in Bondoran, he's also active in the Continuity IRA and his political wing. His day job is real estate agent, and he takes Dave around under the auspice that he's looking to buy some property.
I'd go to dinner with Joe, and Joe would use me to prime, like we'd go up to the restaurant up there, which he had listed, and Joe would tell the guy that I was there looking to buy the restaurant, and that type of deal, old-time car sales stuff here, but, when I was looking around, he'd take me back and show me the kitchen, and that type of thing.
Dave is living the life. The FBI is paying for his trips to Ireland. Joe O'Neill takes him out for meals as write-offs. He's showing him homes. But there's one thing missing from his trips.
It wasn't wrong that you saw, but they were into it for Joe O'Neill and his crowd. You know what I mean? They were into it for themselves, not for the cause. Well, the cause was there, but hey, listen, if it's cash and you put it in your pocket, who knows what comes out?
Dave said Joe was upfront with him about being part of the Continuity IRA. Continuity was a militant splinter group that broke off from the Provisional IRA over compromises made at a political event in 1986.
We hear all kinds of stories about military operations and stuff that Joe had been on. I doubt if Joe ever picked up a gun in his life.
Dave quickly figures out this isn't going well in terms of espionage. He isn't seeing any action. He's supposed to be reporting on danger, and he told us Joe just doesn't seem that dangerous.
So Cabot was, let's go kill somebody, put a bullet in their head if they don't do what we want them to do. That was the difference. And McCabe would do it. And Joe would talk about it and sing about it and get everybody cranked up. That, let's stay just far enough away where you don't get arrested.
Dave said Joe O'Neill was certainly no Mickey McHeaven.
Without taking anything away from them, but once you get to the bottom end of that, accidental terrorists, they've done more damage by accident than they've done on purpose,
Dave called Joe and his friends accidental terrorists. He said they'd done more damage on accident than on purpose. Take, for example, this story.
They were going to go over and do this new police station they were building in Lucas and Kamara, our new RUC station. So they spent 15, 20 minutes trying to, break in the front of the thing because it was boarded up and stuff. Finally, somebody walked out the back, and the back's wide open.
But before he knew it, almost 2 years have gone by, and he hasn't turned up anything concrete or actionable. Mostly just stories like the one of Joe O'Neill's friends drunkenly finding their way into a Northern Irish police station that was under construction. Dave's mission is in a bit of a precarious place, but he sees the promise and certainly sees that it might be worthwhile for him when it comes to money. So Dave's inner entrepreneur takes over, and he dreams up a bold plan.
Well, I got to tell you about this. We would even have this pub over there.
Dave's big idea for gathering better information on the IRA's activities in Ireland? Start a bar. But he's got to get the FBI to go along with it, so he calls up FBI agent Ed Buckley.
We went over and found the pub and saw so forth, and the FBI was paying me. We were all paying us for the trip and stuff. We leased the pub, and I said, here's how much money I think I'll need. Then we agreed to an amount, which was, I think, about $8,000 because we're getting us. We put the rest of our money in the door, which was maybe 20 or 30 grand.
Here's the crazy scheme Dave pitched to the FBI. Lease a pub in an IRA area so he can get to know them, figure out what they're up to, and maybe even where they're getting their support. Here's author Sean O'Driscoll, an Irish journalist who wrote a book on Dave called The Accidental Spy.
One thing that David Rupert is very, very good at is just sitting there and listening without asking too many questions. And he's got that kind of big trucker kind of look, which is a great cover in that world. Like he can just sit there, just this big, huge guy, and just nod his head and listen. And He's a very intelligent guy. He knows not to ask too many questions, just absorb what's going on and then write it, contemporaneous notes straight afterwards.
At this point, Dave's main IRA contact is still his friend Joe O'Neill. Joe sets Dave up with a lease on a pub called the Drow's Inn.
It's a funny place, Tullahan, because it's a tiny sliver of Leitrim that reaches the sea to the south of Donegal. And right at the very end of that little peninsula as it reaches the sea is the Drow's Bar that the FBI had taken the lease over so that David Rupert could sit there with all of these IRA people who would come for their summer holidays. But even though it's in Leitrim, it's actually kind of a suburb of Bundoran, which is quite a hotbed for the IRA.
Less than 2 years into his job as an international spy, Dave Rupert is suddenly also an international businessman, running a pub with his wife, partly paid for by Uncle Sam.
The FBI were now in the Irish pub business. They were paying for the lease on a bar in the Irish Republic, which I would have thought was forbidden under FBI rules to be funding operations internationally like that, that it wasn't passed over to the CIA, but they probably didn't want the CIA knowing about this kind of stuff.
A bar run by an international spy, quietly funded by the U.S. government, may sound like a Hollywood movie, but the reality was far from glamorous.
We paid like $150 a week for it to rent it. But I mean, the place was just awful, filthy, dirty. And we spent a month just cleaning it, so we could live upstairs. And it was what an experience.
Dave realizes pretty quickly that this place is a complete dump. In Ireland, they call it a kip. When Dave and Maureen move into the apartment above the bar, they find used condoms on the floor. Despite the poor condition of the Drow's Inn, Dave made sure the locals had a place they could drown their sorrows. Some of those locals were IRA or Republican sympathizers, and some were not.
We were a Republican pub. We were known as a Republican pub. Patty wouldn't have been Republican. He was pretty anti-Republican because one night,
There was a fight,
Patty was big at taking other people's money out of the bar. So we're in the back, and here's all these caravan people in there. Patty wants to get my attention distracted so he can get Frank's money. Like our dogs trying to steal each other's food. They're talking IRA stuff. And Patty says something about the fucking IRA. And I'm going, Patty, I'm going to tell you something. I get right in front of him like this. I said, there's 40 of them here. And I says, Frank's passed out. You're trying to get his money. And I says, if you get them cranked up, I'm going to let them have you. Because I'm not going to fight with 40 of them to protect you. They had to come to our place. They get down everywhere else in town.
Even a guy like Patty, who wasn't fond of the Republican cause, found a home at the Drow's Inn. Just a few months after the FBI helps Dave lease a pub in Ireland, the one person who's really starting to take notice is the local guard. In Gaelic, the police are called the Garda Síochána, which means guardians of the peace. An officer is referred to as a Garda or guard. Ireland used to have government-enforced early closing times at the pubs. Marcus Mulligan was the local guard who took it upon himself to strictly enforce closing time at the Drow's Inn. Dave told us Mulligan would show up at closing time and ask Dave, "Are you sure no one's still here? Mind if I check?" And Dave would say, "Go ahead." Mulligan would go into the bathrooms and look under the stalls to find the frequent heavy drinkers, unknown to Dave, still perched on the porcelain. They'd yell, "Marcus Mulligan, you feckin' arsehole," and clear on back to their caravans. Now, Mulligan might have maintained that he wasn't enforcing the rules on Dave's pub any harder than any other pub, but to Dave, it sure felt like it.
I suppose in ways unknowns to him kind of helps David Rupert because Mulligan saw, okay, this guy's an American who is a friend of Joe O'Neill, who I know is in Council of the IRA and has a bar only like a mile up the road. So therefore, I'm going to really keep an eye on this guy. So David could then complain to his IRA supporters, all the guards are really on my case, which kind of gave him more credence with them in a way that whenever he got hassled from the guards, he'd make sure that they knew about it, that guards don't like me because I'm a Republican, etc.
Dave's cover as a barkeep earns him street cred with the Republican crowd thanks to that harassment from the Garda. It's important to know that in order to ensure Dave's cover story, the local Garda didn't know what he was really doing.
I expressed a lot of concern about getting lifted by the local guard. I didn't feel like getting roughed up and laying in a cell for a couple of days. And then if I got miraculously just let loose after I got lifted, that would have looked bad too. Yeah. So I expressed a bunch of concern about that.
Dave had to walk a fine line. He needed the guarded to harass him like any other Republican sympathizer, but if he got in real trouble, he couldn't be seen as receiving special treatment from the government.
Most of the deal was for, if you see this guy, me and her in there scrubbing the floors and doing the stuff that we did, who the fuck would think that they were, what they were really up to?
That was the key, because anyone paying attention to Dave would never have suspected that the big Yank was anything other than a hard-working pub owner with a love for Ireland. The only problem was that Drow's Inn was becoming a financial disaster.
I got built with family, but it didn't do shit in the winter. And we just didn't have enough money to grow.
According to Dave, it was pretty difficult to turn a profit. And despite getting money from the FBI, Dave had also put up thousands of dollars of his own money to lease the Drow's Inn. After realizing the bar was going to be a money suck, Dave turns back to his government contacts to get a little more cash.
I don't recall being told this, but Ed's take on the deal was that he told me that when I left, I was no longer working for the FBI, although we wouldn't have left if we known that we were working for the Irish.
There was a catch Dave missed when the pub was leased. Ed Buckley and the FBI were no longer handling his case.
I was working with Buckley. I mean, I like him, but he's kind of like, get the business done first, and if there's a problem, then deal with the problem later, but do the business first. And that's the way he ran his FBI business.
Get the business done, deal with the problem later. Ed Buckley sounded a lot like Dave Rupert. Now he had to gather intelligence on the IRA, turn around a failing dump of a pub, and make sure he wasn't discovered as an infiltrator. And he had to do it all without much help from the people like Ed Buckley who signed him up in the first place. That's next time on The Rebel Kind. If you liked this episode of The Rebel Kind, you could do us a favor by leaving a positive review on whatever hosting service you're listening to us on.
The Rebel Kind is created and hosted by Bob Hergeth and Abden Palish. Executive producer, Anjay Nagpal. Written by Dalton Main, Abden Palish, and Bob Hergeth. Senior producer, Dalton Main.
Editor and mixer, Catherine Anderson. Original music by Dale Eisinger. Show art by Rebecca Hendon.
Our show was recorded in the podcast studio at Roosevelt University. Our development producers were Danielle Elliott and Jen Swan.
Marketing support from Tessa Cairns Clay. Production legal by Bruns, Brennan, and Barry. Legal clearance fair use by Rachel Strom at Davis Wright Tremaine.
From Entropy Media, the Underbelly series was created by Anjay Nagpal. Executive producer, Josh Fielstad. Executive producer, Jed Bauer. Head of operations is Nuna Ebo. Project manager is Sebastian Perry. Associate producer, Heidi Rudvoets. Development and production support, Simona Kessler.
Special thanks to Flynn McRoberts for calling us in 20 years ago. This series is dedicated to the innocent victims of Northern Ireland's decades of violence.